Welcome to Policy Exchange and our event on the future of university places. I think the debate about tuition fees in university places, it seems like a story that's just sort of got more and more complicated over time. In the beginning, we had a certain type of fee, very simple upfront fee. Then we had fees as they ran for most of the last decade, completely different sort of thing. Then we had the proposals of the Browne Review, much more complicated. So, just as we got our heads around that, we then had the government's alternative proposals, which again are quite different to Browne. And now, last but not least, we have the white paper that I think we're going to be mostly talking about today. We have the arcane mysteries of things like core and margin, all these mysterious new terms that we're all grappling with. Fortunately, we have a very, very distinguished panel today of people at this very timely point in the discussion to try and pick our way through all these subjects. First, we have Liz Truss. She's the MP for South West Norfolk. She used to be Deputy Director of our sister think tank Reform, where she was brilliant. She's also written an extremely good paper more recently for Centre Forum, another sister think tank, about bias against serious academic subjects in schools. And she's particularly kind to have come here. She's actually defying the whips. She's going to be dragged back into the House to go to vote, but she promises that she will come back again if they ever let her out again. But thank you for coming, Liz. You'll be first. Second, we have Tim Loynick. He's an economist from the LSE and prolific writer for think tanks as well. He's the author, most recently, of Centre Forum's report, Universities Challenged, Making the EU University System Work for Students. I sense that he is plugging it there. And he's written a huge amount about education reform over the years, higher education in particular. Then we have Professor Malcolm Gillies. He's currently Vice Chancellor of London Met University. He was previously doing the same thing for ANU over in Sydney, and Canberra, sorry. And before that, he was at Yale University. And lastly, but absolutely not leastly, Nicholas Barr. He is another professor of economics from the LSE. He has been involved in this debate, it's fair to say, since the very start, since the very first rounds of discussion about fees before they were a twinkle in Tony Blair's eye. And he's continued to write about them. I'm sure some of you have seen his more recent papers arguing that the government are not currently on track. He's also been an advisor to various other governments around the world, including Australia, New Zealand, and also Hungary. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. Over to you, Liz. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, for that introduction. And I thought that as I was at David Cameron's favourite think tank, I might be let off by the whips. But I think you'll need to get onto them, Neil, and tell them where their priorities ought to be. When I go to public meetings, I'm often told by the general population that 50% is the wrong target for people to go to university, that they think too many people go to university. There are some people out there who just aren't academic. And I think this feeling has increased with the perception that there are many graduates who are unemployed. To me, it's a bit like the claim that in Britain we're producing too many potatoes or pop records. Or it would be if we had a genuine market in higher education. But what we actually have is a very strong control over higher education places. We've effectively got a Stalinist production system. So although I don't agree with those people's comments, it is an entirely rational discussion to be having. Now, if of course the people we're talking about, 50%, were all doing mathematics at the LSE or perhaps even at Cambridge, we might say that that would be hugely productive for our economy. However, there's a pervasive cultural view, I think, in Britain that many of our young people going into university simply aren't capable of achieving that level of attainment. That's something that I think we ought to challenge, and I think that needs to be challenged in the public debate. But inevitably, the setting of targets has created an imperfect outcome in our system that I think a much more free approach would start to address, and we'd start to get the right people into the right universities in our country. At the moment, I think numbers control have had 4 bad effects. Firstly, people are studying the wrong subjects at the wrong university. Secondly, I think it's prevented the development of new models of higher education. Thirdly, it's restricted social mobility, much more than putting up tuition fees has done and will do. And finally, it's allowed Britain to cap our aspirations and claim that university is not fit for much of our population. On the subjects of incentivising the wrong subjects, the wrong university, quotas are clearly artificially restricting expansion of courses at popular universities and preventing, in some cases actually penalising those universities who recruit students who want to do those courses. In Britain, we're less likely to study the high-value subjects at university, like engineering, like sciences, and like maths. And those systems that have a freer approach generally have higher numbers studying those subjects. And where the students themselves are helping fund their education, there's a strong incentive for them to choose courses that are going to be valuable in the future. Now, I've asked BIS for a full analysis of exactly what people are studying at courses, and I asked them this a couple of weeks ago, and they've come back saying they don't hold that information, which is an answer I frequently get from government departments. But what concerns me is we've got an approach where the government controls how many places we have at each university, and yet does not have a handle on what people are studying at those university courses. So what we have is a demi-market. It's a so-called market, but it's within a heavily controlled system. And I think that creates all kinds of perverse incentives into doing subjects that really don't have the value for the educational future of our country. I think secondly, what our system of quotas has done is it's prevented innovation in new models of study. The US community colleges, where one can pursue a 2-year degree, often living at home, maybe supporting yourself, is something that I think would work well in this country, and we should allow those kind of ideas to expand. Now, under our higher education proposals, part-timers will now have access to loans, but given that there is I think it's estimated by Nicholas Barr indeed, there's a 30% subsidy of the student loans for tuition fees by the government, there's a limited pot of state money which different courses are competing for. Therefore, we have new model universities essentially competing against old model universities, where quite often the candidates for those different universities aren't in direct competition. They're looking for different things out of the university experience. There's a school in my constituency called Methold High School that is planning to offer University of London degrees at the school. People can do it, be tutored locally, but have access to the quality control operated by the University of London. I think that's a great idea for a community like the one that I serve, where parts of the constituency are apparently further away from any higher education establishment than anywhere else in the country. And that's exactly the kind of model we should be encouraging. But what we need to make sure is that the pot is open to new approaches. And what Methold University were told Methold School were told when they went to speak, I'm thinking ahead, when they went to speak at a BIS, is they would have to see HEFCE about whether that money could be freed up from another source. So what we're looking at is competition between very high-level courses at top universities competing against this more local option, which I think would be great for local people. And I don't think that's right. And what's also been shown by models overseas is that when you increase the number of places and free up the system and allow people to pay for courses, you actually increase the number of low-income students studying at university. Place availability is much more important than the level of tuition fees charged in terms of increasing participation of low-income groups. So, for example, Australia, which has a tuition fees system and a more open places regime, has 30% of the lowest income quintile. The US has 50% of the lowest income quintile. The UK only has 19%. So we have a much worse record in involving people from low-income groups at a university level. In the UK, when we introduced tuition fees, the participation amongst low-income groups increased from 15 to 19%. And actually that increased at twice the rate of those from the highest income group. So what new places do when you free up the system is help widen participation. But I think what the idea of a state-controlled university target does most is it allows us to cap our aspirations as a country. It imposes a target, whether that's 20%, 40% or 60%, and it says that many people in the country are fit to to go to university. I think that anyone who is up to it and up for it should be able to go to university. And I think we're completely feeble about the way that we prepare people in university in this country compared to other countries. And you can see, looking at the OECD PISA results, where we're 25th for reading and 28th for mathematics. You can see from the Nuffield study, where we have the lowest proportion of 16 to 18-year-olds studying maths of any country in the OECD. And you can see by the curricula that are offered in other countries, and I think this is something we need to work on urgently. Japan, in their pre-university preparation, 95% are studying those qualifications, including Japanese, a foreign language, and mathematics. In US and Canada, most states are studying that till 18. In France, all students working till 18 do French, maths and languages, and likewise in Germany. In Britain, we only have 66% studying A-levels, but what are they doing? Well, in some research that I've done recently, students at independent schools are twice as likely to study science and maths as those at comprehensive schools. They're 3 times as likely to study modern languages and 7 times less likely to study media studies. And I think we can't ignore the preparation for university. And one of the things I think universities ought to be doing is helping schools up their game and working on the government to help schools up their game. In terms of the white paper that's been released, I think there is a good start in terms of the places offered at top universities for students getting AAB. I think that's a good start in opening up and freeing up the system. But I am concerned about AAB creating perverse incentives, and I've talked before about the number of students at comprehensive schools doing subjects like media studies and law. My concern is with AAB, if it's applied in a blanket way, is going to incentivise those subjects that are perceived as easier. And I worry about the university's participation in that, and whether in order to expand their place requirements and get into the next tier, I don't think this is a danger necessarily for Oxford and Cambridge and the LSE, but I think it is a danger for those at the bottom of the top tier may start altering the courses they're offering to fit that AAB requirement, so they jump that hurdle. And that's something I'm very keen to discuss with BIS about how that could be improved, because I think it's a good idea in principle, but I think we risk the perverse incentives that we already see in the school system around those subjects. I think school reform is crucial, but until we have a system that reflects the real value of A-levels, that says that maths is not the equivalent of media studies or law at A-level, we will always have these perverse incentives that are encouraging students to do subjects that may not be most suitable for them, and certainly may not be most suitable as far as the eventual jobs market is concerned. Thirdly, I think we need to extend the freedoms across the higher education sector, and we need to allow the new providers, I mentioned Methwold School and what they're trying to do, we need to allow them that level of flexibility and find a solution, because at the moment I think our tuition fees, whilst it's a good idea that we have tuition fees, they need to be applied in a more flexible way to allow those institutions to participate, because I think that's a very valuable way of getting people on the higher education ladder in the first place. And that brings me to my final point, which there is an underlying issue, that we need to make the position more economic for the government. I'm not sure it's sustainable in the long term that all of our loans are subsidised to the extent of 30%. And I think the balance between tuition fees and place availability is one we need to look at seriously. All the international evidence says that the availability of places at university is much more important than the level of fees being charged in terms of increasing participation and increasing social mobility. And that's something I've been saying to Simon Hughes. I hope it's going to sink in at some point, but I think that's what we need to. I'm just looking to some of his fellow party members as to how we can reform that. But I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Well, I have a feeling that this is going to be a boring event, and that everybody's going to agree that the white paper is rubbish. When even the MP from the governing party is not standing up and defending it wholeheartedly, you kind of know they've got it wrong. Now, I did wave around this earlier. If anyone wants a copy of this, which came out last month, if you asked me at the end, I have a whole bunch of them with me. Now, I have read the FE white paper, which which I'm sure is not true of most people who have commented on it, although I'm sure it is true of the people who are here. And it has both sins of omission as well as downright silly things in it. So the obvious sins of omission are that it says absolutely nothing about research. Now, if you're at a university like mine, research is your primary focus. It is primarily what you are employed on, and I read it from cover to cover, and apart from the odd sort of mention of research is very important, it has absolutely nothing about research. It has a total of 3 paragraphs on postgraduate education, notwithstanding the fact that that is becoming more and more important over time. So it is not a white paper on higher education, it's a white paper to get a government out of a hole on undergraduates and undergraduate fees. Now, if it got them out of the hole on undergraduate fees, that would be wonderful. That would be a really great white paper and worth publishing, but it doesn't. Because we've got 2 problems for undergraduates. First, very, very high fees. And make no mistake, universities should not be charging 9,000 left, right and centre. And secondly, there are issues of the quality of what students get. Because university after university have devalued the amount of teaching they give, they have devalued the exam process. You find how many universities do proper double-blind marking these days. Mine does, just. Probably won't in a year or 2, but virtually no other university does. That's the reality. There'd be all sorts of chops. We did a survey recently of how many weeks of teaching. One university claimed they taught for 44 weeks of the year. Yeah, right. That was a Russell Group university. That's what we call lying. Now, the government has a thing called track. 5 times a year, those of us who are academics have to fill in this asinine form where we have to state what percentage of our time is on different things. I would just put 100% for the top box. And that's how people fill these forms in. Government makes policy on the basis of data like that. Garbage in, garbage out. That's the reality of a lot of this. So what's the government doing? Well, they're doing 2 things. On quality, HEFCE is going to publish a lot of statistics on every course in Britain. There is even going to be a click button where you can print out the results as a PDF. Given that there are 38,000 courses in Britain, it's going to be one heck of a document. And I think we have to wonder whether this very bureaucratic approach to doing this is the right way forward. Things like TripAdvisor are much more user-based than things like HEFCE, which has no particular record or expertise. It's a funding council. It gives out money. It's not a student-oriented body. The good thing about that is they are going to be looking at outcomes, although the definition of employment after 6 months is a peculiarly stupid one, particularly for those of us who teach at top-end universities where lots of people stay on. I remember at one point Oxford had the lowest rate of employment of any university in Britain because so many people stayed on to do PhDs. But the one thing, and here I will commend David Willett, absolutely, personally, he has agreed, he had asked the student loan company, he has asked, in the way that ministers ask, and they have therefore agreed, to release their data to Neil Shepherd. Neil is a very fine econometrician in the University of Oxford, and he and I are going to crunch the numbers and actually work out whether going to one university or another, what it does for your income. Because we can back that out of student loan company funding data, repayment data, because we know exactly how it works. Now, we hope in the future to be able to add to that your background, the course you studied, and your parental income. We hope to be able to connect it to UCAS forms so that we know where you came from. We hope to really be able to understand social mobility. Now, at the moment, we're just going to get it at a broad brush level, and that would not have happened without David, because the SLC have said no many, many times to Neil and Nick and others who've asked for that data. So one thing about David is he does respect social science, he does respect the power of data, and that holds out some potential that the next white paper, or maybe the one after it, or the one after, because there will be many white papers to come, maybe that will have some merit. Now, on fees, when I launched this paper, David was on the platform with me. I described it as the minister Britain's taxpayers cannot afford. You have to feel sorry for the poor sod. He reached a chance to launch and then I insult him. But to be honest, he deserved it. Because the problem with these fees is that they are forgiven very generously. The 30% figure that Nick has worked out, with all due respect to Nick, is a certain sort of... we don't know how many of these will be repaid because we don't have good data on exactly who will be in a position to repay them under the new regime. But what we do know is that the marginal pound will be forgiven. So the way it works out, everything that's left over after 30 years is forgiven. So if you were already being forgiven on a fee level of 7.5 and your university charges 9, then all of that 1.5 is going to be forgiven by taxpayers. So the bill could be immensely large for taxpayers. It is not clear the new regime will save any money. So we may have annihilated one party, upset thousands of people, and not save the taxpayer any money. That's really quite remarkable. I mean, even by the standards of politicians, that's impressive. So the government is going to do two things. Firstly, it's going to free up the AAB sector. And as Liz said, there are some lots and lots of problems at the margin. Because if you are the marginal AAB and the ones above you expand slightly, you could run out of people. And you're not allowed to take any ABBs, because those are quoted to other universities. So you'll go bankrupt unless you can find someone to take. And it would be really perverse if Sussex or Kent or someone went bankrupt because they couldn't get enough AABs because they'd all gone to Imperial, etc. I've asked Biz for an explanation on this. I'll let you know when I get an answer to my email. And then they've taken away 5% of everybody else's fee, of everybody else's students, and those are open to competition. 5%. Whoa, now this is competition red in tooth and claw. Imagine that we got all the car manufacturers together and we gave them a quota, but then we're going to make it really nasty for them. We're going to take away 5% of their guaranteed quota. It's hard to think that would really, really give Ford an incentive to get up in the morning and really design the best Mondeo, the best Focus, etc. A market works by companies offering a product and setting a price and then seeing how many they can sell. A market does not work by guaranteeing people a quantity that they can sell, however bad the product is and however much they charge, and then seeing how much they'd like to charge and what sort of product they'd like to offer. That is a guaranteed way of getting bad courses at high prices. Lo and behold, we have 100 odd monopolists, and they're all almost all, one honourable exception in a handful, they're almost all charging £9,000. Well, blow me, monopolist decides to rip off consumer. You know, I mean, surely the Department of Business ought to have worked that one out in advance. I was in the Department of Business today giving a lecture on what is a market. I wish they'd asked me a few months ago. Because this is not a market. You have to force suppliers to set the price before you set the quantity. The quantity has to follow the price. If you get that right, things will broadly speaking work. If you get that wrong, things will never work. And no amount of tinkering in the way the white paper does will change that. If we had it in cars, the Jaguars and the like would persuade people maybe to cap the fee of a car at 40,000. Then Ford would insist the Mondeo should cost 40,000. Because they don't want Mondeo drivers to feel embarrassed or feel their car is second rate. So it's much better to force them to pay 40,000 so that other people don't look down on them or think they drive a bad car. That's exactly what universities are saying at the moment. That they've created some wonderful course that's brilliant. And they don't want people to feel that they're at a second-rate university. But there is heterogeneity in universities, just as there is in cars. That was quick. And that matters a great deal, and that's why you have to set price before you set quantity. Get that right, everybody lives happily ever after. There we are.
Thank you, Tim. I'll touch you on that. Malcolm.
Thank you. Have I got a deal for you? If you'd like to come to London Metropolitan University, you can study a course full-time for £4,500 right up to £9,000. It'll depend on the course. It'll depend on its cost, its demand, it'll depend on the employability, and it also is set given our ideology, which is say we seek to be affordable to the whole community. Average is 6,850, about £500 above the average that you currently get through the student and the government contribution, the current system. So it doesn't actually sound said like that, quite as revolutionary as it appears to be when you look at the league tables, and we prefer London Met to turn them round, so they look a touch better. I'd like to deconstruct the question, however, because the view that we're talking about university places, I think, is tragically wrong, and continues to be tragically wrong because of the failure to link up further education and all forms of post-secondary education and employment training. I don't think that the 50% figure is the figure to be talking about. I talk about 80%. I think that 80% of our population needs to have some form of post-school training. And whether it's in an apprenticeship, whether it happens to be in a further education college, whether it is in a night class, whether it is in a traditional or non-traditional university, depends on what they wish to do and their aspirations. And I hate it when people have the view that somehow you can dump someone at 16 and expect them to navigate the 21st century without any further training. I think we should be a little bit more like Korea or Finland in our thinking. So if I could just look at the white paper and say a few things about it. It seems to me it's a hopeless white paper if you're looking for a coherent statement about higher education. As Tim has said, it doesn't talk about research, it doesn't really talk about postgrad. More importantly, it doesn't talk about European Union undergraduate or international students in any sensible way. So it's really a paper which is ultimately about English undergraduate students. And can I suggest, important as they are, they're not the only pebble on the beach. So, we find in there a partial remedy to the failure of the fee-setting exercise, and I think Tim's illustrated that quite well, and also, I think, the impending failure of the access exercise. But will it work? That's going to depend on the daring of universities to be different, the daring of students actually to take advantage of the choice, maybe go to a private provider or a further education college, and also how daring the regulator will be, who will regulate not just the taxpayer's interest, but also regulate in the future the student's interest because of the taxpayer's investment in the student loan. I think there are some good things in the white paper. Let's touch upon. I'm actually looking at Nick's slides, and he had there the good, and he's crossed out nearly all of that one away. So I thought I'd just put a couple of them back. More information and less regulation, clearer rights and obligations, encouragement to industry and employers to get re-involved, to take us back to, in fact, the 1960s or maybe earlier, a proportionate sense of quality mechanism, and also something that could become more serious about access and wider participation, perhaps in some of the changes suggested about offer. Now, what wasn't there, I thought the little way that Tim is always read documents to think what isn't here, as well as all the other things we've mentioned, there isn't a big picture, but there's an invitation to consult on 8 different consultations, the first of which closes on Thursday, and the last of which closes next summer. So, it didn't actually give all the answers or have something which could very rapidly turn itself into a changed landscape, though it does in a few places. What I feared about and what wasn't there was a loan differentiation, partly because of some of the work looking at student loan council, loan data and other things, to say, well, actually different institutions have different repayment profiles. And how do you then use that to become an influencer on how you're going to dispose of government monies around the sector? And I worried about that, given that I'm sure my institution would have a very poor repayment profile compared with some like Oxford or Cambridge. What wasn't there also was to talk about something that we really did need in the last few months, and that is to say, where's the subsidy for the priority areas of the sciences, or the moderately priority areas of languages, or maybe creative industries? And we're seeing that emerging now in the TDA in the way they're going to fund initial teacher training, but we're not seeing anything half as definite in this white paper. So if they are really the priority areas, how much is it worth? Because people have set fees not knowing what the state contribution would be for those areas. Just some worries to finish up about the 3-tier game, or as I would rather call it, the game that the 3 tiers will play. They will game the system, as institutions always do. And I worry that Tier 1, we will have the AABs there. I think there are some worries about what the AAB's in, and also how well we can measure the AAB across the 48 different ways in which you can get into a university. A-level is only one. But the ultimate thing is how many people will be in that class. And I hear people saying 6 or 8 or 10, maybe an outlier 15. But will Newcastle be in it? Will Essex be in it? I don't think so. And if you look at the percentages of the AAB students currently there, it seems to me that there's a big game there to be played, or a system to be gained. If we look at Tier 2, I see this is where really price and either reputation or aspiration have to come into closer alignment. And the sector that strikes me as having the biggest gap between particularly aspiration and price is going to be the 1994 group, which invested a lot, has the highest level of debt as a group, as I understand it, and really does aspire to be very research intensive. But whether that's going to be possible, especially when we don't know the research part of the equation, I think is a very big question to ask. And then you have Tier 3, and I believe my university may be only one of 3 in that tier, which has come in with an average price below 7,500. And 20,000 places, that sounds a lot of places to divide up among 3 universities. Now, of course, it isn't, because this is where the new entrants come in, that test the mettle of those institutions and any others who, with fee waivers and others, find themselves gravitating down in the next few months below 7,500. The only way I think an institution like mine, London Met, can game that system and win is with a new product, with new levels of efficiency, and fundamentally rebooting the operation, keeping in mind what further education and private providers can do and will do, and some of them might do it, in fact, with us. It's that level of flexibility of thinking that I think is the only way for those who may be in that area really to make the most of this opportunity. The same product range going out, even at a lower price, I don't think will be enough to give a secure future for an institution. Thanks.
Thank you, Malcolm. And your closing thought reminds me that Tim having plugged his piece, I should plug the piece we've recently run about further education, providing higher education as well, because I think it is one of the most interesting and more competitive ends of the market, as it were. Anyway, lastly but not leastly.
Well, sorry guys, it's going to be rather boring. There's a mass outbreak of agreement here. The white paper is fantastically clever. It's a collection of policies that manages to achieve not a single desirable objective. And it's sadly very clear why. In the present system, the interest subsidy makes loans fiscally expensive, hence the numbers game. One of the good things in the reform is they fix that problem. They raise the interest rate on student loans. But loans continue to be fiscally expensive because of the large increase in the repayment threshold. So what the new system does is it creates the same problem, the numbers cap, for the same reason, the high fiscal cost of loans. So the strategy is flawed. The white paper is an attempt to use clever devices to get around the flaw, but no amount of clever tinkering can fix the strategic problem. The only solution is to fix the strategy. Now, as a professional economist, I have to have some equations. I offer you two. Competition plus variable supply equals improved quality. Competition plus fixed supply equals dog's breakfast. And this is what we've got. So, what's good about the reform? Raising the fees cap is good. Raising the interest rate on student loans is good. More and better information for prospective students is good. What's bad? First of all, abolishing the teaching grant for the arts, humanities and social sciences. Secondly, truly horrible, abolishing education maintenance allowances and aim higher. Thirdly, excessively increasing the threshold at which a loan repayment starts. And as I've indicated, that's the killer problem. The reforms raised the repayment threshold from £15,000 to £21,000, so loans continue to cost shed loads of taxpayer money, so numbers continue to be capped. If there is only one thing to be rescued from the wreckage now, it is don't index that £21,000 threshold. There's been talk of indexing into earnings. That simply perpetuates the strategic problem. So, the white paper specifically, the essay question that the organisers set. As we've heard, there are going to be, in essence, there's going to be three groups of universities. Group A are, quote unquote, the top universities, who accept mainly AAB students and can expand. Now, competition within that group is a zero-sum game, because if the number of AAB students is fixed, it's not clear that within group competition is going to be very helpful. For the group as a whole, there's going to be expansion by bidding AAB students away from, quote-unquote, middle universities. And middle universities are the ones that don't get many AAB students, but which charge average net fees of over $7,500, and therefore can't bid for marginal students. They're squeezed because they lose a chunk of their quota. The low-price universities, there's three sorts, as we've heard. There's the new private providers, there's further education colleges, and there are universities charging average fees below $7,500. those institutions can expand, but they've only got a margin of 20,000 to play with. So the expansion capabilities are not very great. And the Financial Times has referred to the three groups as the new elite, the squeezed middle, and the insurgents, and I think that captures what's going on fairly well. Now, it's important to understand that total numbers of students continue to be fixed. So it's a zero-sum game. So if some universities expand, those in the top group and the low price group, if those universities expand, then others have to contract. Separately, if the number of higher education institutions increases because of new private entrants, then the average size of each must fall. So a lot of this is just ferrets quarrelling in the sand. And as Liz has said quite rightly, what increases opportunity is to have an expansionary system with more student numbers. Now, I've got 5 worries about what this mechanism will do, and I haven't got time to go through them in detail. I shall just skim through them, and we can come back to them if people want. Worry 1 is quality in the middle group of universities. There's no mechanism to increase student numbers by raising quality. To economists, no mechanism for shifting the demand curve you face out. The only lever is lower price, in other words, moving down the demand. And as I said, competition within the group is a zero-sum game. So the only way an average university in the second group can expand is by handing out enough dosh in fee waivers to become one of the third group and be able to bid for its share of the 20,000 margin. Quality, therefore, of that middle group is at risk. They lose money because they lose quota, and they risk losing their best students to the first group of universities. And there is a real worry that over time, this mechanism will hollow out that very important part of the university sector. So that's quality in the middle group. The second worry is quality in the low price end. You've got places allocated by the funding council on the basis of price and quality. So the system is one with a shortage of places and with a central planning approach to quality. Now, I spent 2 years working for the World Bank in Central and Eastern Europe after the collapse of communism, and I can smell communist-type bureaucracy when I see it. Anyone with any knowledge of the communist experience will be skeptical about centrally planned competition. It ain't going to work. Worry 3 is access. There's nothing in this that I can see that really widens participation. Worry 4 is a segmented sector. The proposed market structure drives a wedge between the top group of universities and the others. The first group can expand, the second group will be squeezed, the third group can get larger, at least a bit. But at the extreme, you've got what economists call an unstable equilibrium, where things shoot off to plus and minus infinity. And as someone put it to me rather elegantly yesterday, what might be called soft binaries. There's going to be a tendency to go to the 2 extremes. Worry 5, stability of the sector. The Funding Council is going to be doing a juggling act. If you have rapid change, you have a risk that some institutions will fail simply because the numbers cap denies them an important degree of freedom. In that case, the Funding Council will step in and mute the competitive effects, in which case you have a centrally planned system without competition, but which is very complex. So you've got a complex system of competition without competition. So, 5. So, sad conclusion. The combination of loans that are first of all larger, secondly with a higher repayment threshold, combined thirdly with maintenance grants, means that the fiscal cost of expanding the system is high, leading to the numbers cap. And there's nothing in this, as I've said, that does much to widen participation. So the white paper fails to get around the strategic problem of the high costs of extra students, no increase in quality except possibly for the top group. I mean, how can a system designed to lower price lead to a better student experience? Little or no improved access, no increase in size. I rest my case, Miller. Final 1 minute. The essay question, what next? I've got a slide called the next white paper. Restore teaching grants, block grant, make loans less leaky. Those two together reduce the cost to the taxpayer of expanding student numbers, which means you can have genuine competition. And the third and last thing is to restore the equivalent of education maintenance allowances and aim high. Thank you very much.
So, a universally upbeat assessment of where we are at the moment then. We do have some time for questions and answers. If you, like I said, you are aware you've got those in mic that will come to you. And if you want to say who you want to direct the question to as well. We've got a gentleman in grey shirt that we've got in front.
Hello, I'm Mark Fuller on Dutch Communications at the 1994 group, and I'm feeling thoroughly miserable now thanks to those sunny upbeat predictions just then. I think it's fair to say we recognise some of the threats that Malcolm particularly spelled out there. I don't think we're as downbeat yet as what's indicated. This kind of idea of squeeze middle is definitely something that's there. Sort of question really, do you talk about the top being the ones we're going to expand, sort of half a dozen or so at the top, if you like, expand. I think it's also fair to say the top, middle and bottom don't necessarily follow mission group lines. I mean, we would be in a point where we say a decent majority of ours should be considered among those very top, and if they would wanted to go that way in terms of AAB expansion, would probably be very well equipped to do so. But is there a desire, do you think, at the what's recognised as the top end of the university league table elite? Is there a desire there to expand, to take on more AAB students, and will that then have the direct impact on the squeeze mini, if you like?
Interesting question. Do top universities, in quotes, want to expand?
I don't pretend to speak for the top universities in the slightest, you'll understand, but I did observe in the Financial Times today Malcolm Grant of UCL saying that yes, they would look at some selective expansion. And why not? Especially if you do have good capacity and you've got and you're located in London in particular, very high costs, that could be very sensible to do. So he's the first one I've seen who's actually said, yes, it could be interesting.
I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I know that a few years ago LSE put in for an extra 42 undergraduate places. I mean, clearly that will revolutionise undergraduate. There will be small sectors. So, for example, LSE has a Gender Studies Institute that has master's level courses and no undergraduate provision. So, presumably that group could investigate having undergraduate provision. So, previously in the past, every time we've asked to expand, BISA said no on the grounds that we'd be taking places from somewhere else. We can't do that. But we would now be able to do so. But I doubt we're going to expand by more than 5 to 10% as a top group taken as a whole. But that's enough to really be destabilising for the marginal AAB person who's number 11, who's therefore lost every single student.
I mean, two things following up from that. First of all, we didn't get the 42
No, we didn't.
Secondly, we decided 2 or 3 years ago that we were going to stabilise our numbers, at least for the time being, in order to consolidate and improve the quality of what we do. So my view is I don't see an appetite, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, and University College, for anything more than very marginal expansion. I think nothing like 5 or 10%, maybe 1%.
I'm very interested in how it will change the balance between courses in the top universities. So I'm not an expert, we've got 2 experts here probably on university internal politics. But my understanding is the way that the HEFCE equations work is the battle between departments about who gets the extra students. So I think that might change the dynamic of what goes on in universities. So I don't know which type of courses that would end up favouring. But as I said, I'm already concerned about the AAB and the potential there to disfavour courses like maths and sciences, where people generally have lower grade offers to get into even the Russell Group universities, as opposed to some of the arts subjects where people are getting straight A's.
good question.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, so LSE's Department of Mudslinging, which by and large doesn't do very well, but we have to fill our quota. Your point is, we don't have a quota anymore. We could actually move students from mudslinging to economics or social policy. Haven't thought of that.
No, I think Liz's point is the other way around, that if we were the marginal university in this room and we haven't got enough science students, we will then begin to offer a BSc and you can do anything you like, provided you've got 2 A's and B, whatever the subjects are, or even an ASDAN certificate in volunteering, if that qualifies as valid. I don't know if you know,
I think it depends, it'll be different from the top and the bottom of that group.
Yeah.
The top of that group, I mean, my question to you actually is, in the top of that group, which subjects are going to be advantaged by the lifting of that cap? So the moment numbers are being restricted in the top subjects.
Our university is led by research. This makes no difference to us at all.
I think what you're pointing out is very important. We will see much more subject-specific variation, but then you have to say, why is it that more universities haven't gone into variable pricing anyway? And that will encourage people to say, well, different courses have different prices. And I would hope we'll then move away from the concept of the average being 7,500. Because if you take the average, and I have some courses running at £9,000 at London Met, and some at 4.5, well then they're covered because our average is below 7.5, but the same course could be £500 cheaper at LSE, but it won't be covered because the average will be there. So the average, I think, is something we have to move away from. It will become in the end subject-specific and variable.
Which is a good thing. Why do you think it's been easier, or why have you been able to do that in a way that the academic politics have sort of prevented elsewhere?
It could be that at London Met there is a very strong view of affordability, and I mean a real belief in access and wider participation, but also because we've been running a complete review of our undergraduate program, which we started in September of last year. So it came at exactly the right time for us indeed to start making some of the big changes, including reducing our course portfolio by about 70%.
So we raised more questions than we answered there, but let's bring it back right to the front.
Elaine Simpson from Zerco, and I've spent, well, probably the last 30-something years of my life working in education, in mainstream education, in the public sector as chief education officer, and in the private sector, and always in disadvantaged areas. And I'd just like to go back to the issue of access, because I think over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of movement in improving the GCSE outcomes for young people from disadvantaged areas, but we have woefully neglected the sixth form agenda. And what we've done is we've left small sixth forms. Everybody gets a chance at teaching A-level because it's really good fun and they feel much better and you can't shift that. And what that means is that the young people from the disadvantaged areas are not coming out with the 3 A's or the 2 A's and a B. They are primarily coming out with lower grades, albeit their ability levels are just as good and just as great. And my real worry is that actually we're not addressing this in any way, and I think EMA was very helpful in getting them to stay on. I think Aim Higher was very helpful, but we really do need to tackle this issue of allowing sixth forms to continue to provide very, very second-rate education and make sure that people do come out with the best level that they possibly can, and we can then really address the access issue. Because the problem is that if 400,000 students, potential students, are going to be rejected every year, a very high percentage of them are from disadvantaged areas, and that is unacceptable.
And a major implication of AAD is that it rules out use of contextual data.
So there's somebody who wants to come in immediately on that point, then we'll go over here.
Hi, Kirsten Zenta, but I just wanted to add on to that, actually, and put my foreign cap on of having been a product of an American university and have lots of other colleagues and friends who are, and clarify a few things about secondary education. Yes, up through 18 you're required to take maths, sciences, etc. But actually you're supposed to take it at the university level as well. And so I took 2 years of calculus, biology, chemistry, physics, all at university, as well as English, foreign languages, etc. at university, mind you. It's a 4-year degree, not a 3-year degree, which is a big point to make. However, my degree is in music and philosophy, right? And yeah, I'm quite successful in what I do, and it has nothing to do with music or philosophy. So I was given comprehensive, in the positive sense of the word, education as a result of that. And also, just to clarify for the audience, if they're not quite certain, that there is no A-level testing. You get graded according to your coursework and homework over a period of time and a handful of exams. And that in some ways also adds to some of the accessibility issues for lower income and others, because you're graded over a period of time, not just for a one-off test. You're also not offered the place first contingent on your positive A-level results. Okay. The question I did have, though, considering the current system that you have, is the government thinking potentially about, for example, tax incentives for industry to get engaged more with the universities to provide, this is a question, I'm not advocating for this, scholarships and other things like they do in America, so that you have both need and merit-based scholarships, where industry then demands some type of results as a result.
How big a chunk of American university finances are scholarships and the like, not non-fee income, as it were? I mean, across the whole sector at the top, we know about the huge Harvard endowment and the like, but I don't know if you have a sense of what it's like for...
In terms of public and private?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you look at the figures, OECD, education at a glance, America has the highest private, so non-public, I think of almost any country in the OECD, possibly 65–70%. Private, whereas opposed to if you look at Denmark, it's 99% public. I mean, those would be the two extremes.
If you look on, I sent a website recently that you can look up the net cost of tuition, and including accommodation, it was $18,000 a year to go to Harvard, including accommodation. And that was nowhere near the formal sticker price, which was about 8.0, and the difference was scholarship income that was available. Those things are already tax deductible in Britain, so there is already a big incentive, but they're not part of the culture. And I think that's the issue. It's just like giving money. You get 40% tax break if you donate money to a university, but culturally people in Britain don't. LSE, US fundraising arm, I'm sure, does better than the UK fundraising arm. It's the material you're working with.
Interesting. There's a question, I think, like said, and then we'll come to the conclusion. Oh, of course.
Am I next?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Davey, I am Higher Education Policy Manager for the Association of Colleges. And firstly, just like to thank Policy Exchange for an excellent and timely report. Those who have read the work done by Ralph and colleagues, and thank you for that. I'd just like to make a couple of observations, and I'm sure the panel will respond. It seems to me we're moving from a sector that has pretty much experienced a form of government block grants for possibly, you could argue, for 500 years, and is in the university sector in different forms, and now we're beginning to open that up more to some kind of marketised system. Now, unless I've missed a trick here, to do that means that there's going to be an element of dysfunction for a while. I don't know anyway, maybe someone give me an example in the Western world where we've had a move from a system that's been based on block grants for such a long period, and obviously I exaggerated to make the point, and then moving to a more marketised system in a small way in the first place, where there isn't going to be difficulties, there isn't going to be elements of instability. I think it's also worth noting, secondly, unless I've misread the figures, that the university sector in the UK has received something like 50% more monies from the government over the last 7 years, the highest again in OECD. So I mean, you could argue that there are elements that it's quite a bloated sector, and I've worked in that sector and in the FE sector, and Martin may have a comment on that. But it seems to me that we're beginning of a journey here. And if you look at the white paper, in it is continually saying that this is the start of opening up more of the market. From the college sector, we're enthusiastic. We actually wanted 30,000 places to start with, and we're looking at a threshold of 6,000. I believe there was a late lobby to bring that down. I'd be interested for the panel's reaction to my comments.
And if I could just make a point that the bloating that you're talking about is on the student support side, not the university income side. The student support is gobbling up a larger share of the cake than I think I would like to see.
I think they're very interesting comments, and can we think of models where such a thing has been done? I think it could have been done here if we'd maintained, as Nick advocated, some form of continuing institutional grant in a productive way. And it would have been possible over time to maybe phase that down, but also over time for the two bits of the market to come together. Because remember, of course, the AABs and the below 7,500s in the end join up. And at that moment, you've actually got a market.
Yeah,
Everything's
exactly.
margin and there is no core. That's what the paper says, but everyone's forgotten about that because it's downplayed. But it does really strike me that if there had been that continuing institutional grant there, it would have made this much easier to negotiate. The fact that it isn't there, and you're quite right, the fact there was expanding provision coming from the state for a long time now gives a cliff edge effect in terms of the planning of institutions. It's not that the government may not be investing any less, but it's going through the student path, and that doesn't give institutions any comfort. That's which I think was a real public policy mistake, to have leapt to this position where 80% of your students may be getting no funding at all, ultimately, and the institution, of course, gets nothing therefore in consequence of that. It's a very strange and I think a very perturbing example of public policy that ran awry.
I just wanted to come in on the point about sixth forms, because I completely agree that is a massive problem at the moment. And I think one thing that's happening in Norfolk, which I think is very good, is having collaborative sixth forms. So you still have sixth form based in local towns and villages, but there's a strand of expertise running from head sixth form. So you get sixth form teachers being trained at the right level. I think we've got a massive issue with perverse incentives on which A-level students are studying. And it's not just about the grades, it's about how many people are emerging in the right subjects. And this is why I'm trying to find out how many maths and science places there are. Because if comprehensive students are half as likely to do maths and science at A-level as independent students, how on earth are we going to get more comprehensive school students into Russell Group universities if their courses are in those subjects require maths and sciences? It's a huge problem. I think on the issue of the EMI, I don't agree, and that's probably one of the things I don't agree with Nicholas on. I don't think we're providing free education for 16 to 18-year-olds. I don't think an additional incentive is needed. We're going to have compulsory education anyway. What I do think we should do is look at international models and see, I mean, I propose this idea of an ABAC, which is similar to the EBAC. It focuses more on rigorous academic subjects. It says that students should do at least some maths at A-level and at least some humanities stroke languages, because I think that is missing from our A-level structure at the moment. And I think the fact that we have the lowest proportion doing maths in the OECD is something we should seriously worry about. On the subject of aim higher, I would like to see OFFA refocus its efforts to looking at schools and looking at the evidence of why it is that so few schools are applying, so few comprehensive schools are applying to go to the top universities. Is it because of subject choice? Is it because of grade levels? Is it because of teacher encouragement? And actually ask schools to publish how many students at your school applied to Oxford and Cambridge, how many schools applied to the Russell Group universities. So there's much more information from the school side coming forward. Also, I think we've got an excessive focus on performance at 16, and it's noticeable that the recent targets have been on performance at 16. Actually, it's performance at 18 we should be looking at more, and I think that's where the government should be looking at things like floor targets, albeit on specific subjects, so we don't have the perverse incentives.
I want to respond to Malcolm Anthony's. Why was teaching grant abolished? Answer: if you replace £4,000 of teaching grant with £4,000 of student loan, given the bizarre way our public sector accounts work, you reduce public spending as measured by the PSBR. If you then, in addition, estimate the non-repayment of loans on very optimistic assumptions, which is what happened, then you appear to have reduced public spending, but it's smoke and mirrors, it's an accounting trick. The 30% figure of the cost of loans, that's now. I completely agree. Sort of the government estimates it's going to stay about the same. I mean, below, complete below. I'm sorry, Liz isn't here anymore, because on EMAs and aim higher, I'm not saying you should restore the exact institutions. What I'm saying is, if you ask the question, why do people not go on to university? One constraint is financial constraints, another is information constraints. EMAs and aim higher were directly addressing those two sets of constraints. How you design mechanisms for doing so, you know, it's not my area of expertise, I defer to others, but I do think that it's important that some sixth formers do need financial help, and others, you know, there is information, aspirations, consciousness raising. So I think the two institutions do hit the right targets, even if other instruments might do so even better.
Good. So I'm calling from another think tank, because we waited very patiently a second, and then we'll...
Hi, Ryan Shorthouse from the Social Market Foundation. Firstly to Tim, I think it was very good that David's released the information on returns from the student loans company. It's good that you're digging into that. But how robust do you think that data is, considering that 1 in 5 of the cohort don't go through the student loan system? I mean, it could be a case, maybe they're more wealthy, so the effect of that could depress the benefits that institutions have. And secondly, my impression is that the student loans company that don't have the data on the UCAS points, if you can't control for your higher education attainment, I don't know how valuable that is, but that's my first point. The second one is to Nick on the insurance model idea that he has. And of course reducing the subsidy is one way of liberalising the student numbers. I just wonder whether you could explain in detail how that would work. I mean, how would universities raise cap for that? Would it mean a liberalisation of the fee cap? And the SMF actually proposed a similar sort of model where universities would take more risk for the fees that they charge. And the final point really was to Liz, but to everybody, which is that Nick mentioned that the teaching grant shouldn't be cut as much as it was, but considering the government wants to achieve some sort of fiscal neutrality, considering the rate of return from university is public and private return is a lot less than lower down, say preschool or primary education. Do you think really some of that money should be transferred lower down the age spectrum if you want to achieve fiscal neutrality? I mean, at the moment, OECD data suggests that actually per head there's more spent on tertiary education than any other form. So yeah.
3 questions, one very specific as well.
Yep. They're not all in, but the people who are missing are rich people. They're overwhelmingly from private schools. So the question is, does that matter? If we're interested in how big the losses are to government, it doesn't matter at all. Then we are interested in the people who are in the system, not the people who are not in the system. It does matter if we're interested in social mobility or saying this is the average. So you have to know what you are measuring. But subject to knowing what you are measuring, what I am measuring is interesting. Sorry, that was a really rubbish academic answer. But no, it'll be fine. It will be interesting. And it also depends on which university. If you're talking about Cambridge, we're missing a large number of people. If we're talking about London Met, we're missing virtually no one. There's a clear link between universities that take rich kids from Eton and universities that don't, and how many people are missing from the student loan company data. It also varies by subject. If we are given enough of the fields and UCAS are asked by the relevant ministers to participate, we will be able to link them, because we will then have the person's name, the subject they're studying, the university and their home postcode. Armed with that, we have a very high chance of finding them on the UCAS data. Obviously, it's easier if they're called Lloydig than if they're called Smith. But even so, we'd be able to make 99% of them. It would be very exciting. But we haven't got that second stage yet. And we haven't got the first stage data. The SLC have agreed to release it. They agreed to release it in the spring. They now say we should expect it in September. And I wouldn't bet my house on us getting it in September. We'll see.
There was a specific question about the T-graph point.
Well, in the insurance model, if I were made king tomorrow in some peculiar parallel universe, one, I would restore T grant as block grant, possibly at a level 11 parallel. which means students would take out smaller loans, which would disproportionately reduce the loss on loans, because the larger the loan, the higher the margin loss. So that per se reduces the loss on loan. Second thing I would do would be to reduce the threshold at which repayments start, such that more graduates repay their loan in present value terms, which further reduces the loss on loans. The question is, what do you do with the remaining loss? If the taxpayer has to pay it, Treasury controls money. So the remaining loss, which is a lot smaller than currently, falls on not the taxpayer. In a paper, Neil Shepherd's and my paper, we say some of it should come from a national cohort risk premium, so you get an element of redistribution in the system. But to stop everybody going to the maximum fee level, for higher fees, there should be a university-specific insurance premium, whereby when Oxford charges the top fee, they get from the student loans company the fee minus their assessed insurance premium.
Yeah.
So they pay, in the jargon, the RAD charge up front to the government. Can you estimate that insurance premium with absolute precision for the next 30 years? Of course not. There's an element of rough and ready, but it removes from universities the incentive for them all to run at the top. So that's the thinking behind that one. Case fatigue grant, unless you believe that the whole of higher education is private benefit, you have an efficiency case to subsidise something that creates external benefits. We can argue about the size of it, but that is the efficiency reason for having teaching grants. The equity arguments for widening participation, I completely agree, point to more resources earlier in the system, and if I was still king tomorrow, up to a point I would abolish grants and spend most of that money much earlier in the system. But there's two separate things. There's the efficiency argument and the equity argument. Two objectives, two instruments.
Thank you. Tom Papper, erstwhile higher education policy analyst. The financially unsustainable nature of this seems to result from the fact that there's been a great increase in the level of forgiveness of the loans, both with the higher repayment cap and with the fact that they're forgiven completely after 30 years. Doesn't this create a perversity where on the one hand the greatest amount of government subsidy is going to those who will yield the least amount of productivity to benefit society? And secondly, that if it therefore fails to provide the incentive for the very people that Liz was speaking about earlier, who are on the margin, should be considering whether or not it is worthwhile attending university. But because they will receive the greatest level of forgiveness, they actually have that incentive removed.
Can I say something on that? Which is, I think you're partly right, but only partly. Because if somebody was going to earn 100,000 before, whether they earn 101,000 or 200,000 as a result of going to university, they're still going to pay back all of their debt. So you want to be pretty careful saying that a high final income is evident that you've got a lot in university. And equally, there will be people for whom university will be in some sense transformative, but who won't pay back much money. So if you go from earning 12,000 a year, I didn't go to university, this is my income, to say earning 25 in your first year up to 30, you then go part-time and earn 15, your lifetime income is dramatically higher, but you'll pay back virtually nothing. So it's quite hard to do that mapping from what you will pay back and that's what your subsidy is to... This is the most comic session I've ever been.
I do apologise. It's so interesting, the discussion.
I know
words of wisdom later.
I forgot what they were now. So it's really hard to do that mapping, and therefore I don't think you can make the conclusion that you have made, but I don't think anyone can rebut it either, and I think it's an interesting question that government needs to do further work on, which with the student loan company data, we should be able to do some further work on it.
And I mean, if I could just say, agreeing with him, equating earnings with value to the individual or the society of the degree. I mean, clearly, of course, there is an element of truth in it, but it's only part of the story. I mean, all the evidence of the importance of education on parenting, there's sort of very significant social benefits. So I agree with you up to a point, but it's only up to a fairly small.
Just rehearse an argument that I quite often hear coming from some of my colleagues in performing arts or some of the humanities areas. And it comes out in a way that's so naive, I get really worried. And it makes me think we need to get debt advisors into our universities in the coming years. It says, I'm doing this course, it might be in dance, it might be in art. I'm never going to earn more than £21,000. That sounds like a fantastically high amount of money. Therefore, why don't you charge me £9,000? Because I'm not going to pay it back, and it's free. It's free at source. We're all told it's free at source. You don't have to pay it back. And I say, well, you know, there's a problem with that. In the year 2046, someone's going to be writing that off. And it will actually be someone is paying for this. And I think we've lost this issue of which I've been writing on ever since last October. Where's the taxpayer argument? As against a student argument, as against an institution argument, you do have to sift them out because it's a huge tangle. And in the minds of some of our students, I think it's at the point where you have to sit them down and say, look, this is what happens. What would happen if Nick was king and in fact it was not inflation linked, the 21,000? At what point will you bump into 21,000? And also talking about what does a repayment actually mean. It reminds me a bit of the subprime situation in America. You know, it's free for a few years, you know, you live in the house, you've got a debt holiday, I think they call it. But eventually these things come around, and in the next 30 or 35 years, governments will change their mind on a few of these details and have every ability to do it. So I really worry about our responsibility for our students in how they will approach this incredibly complex exercise where none of us can give the answers, because it all depends on what happens in the next 35 years.
And that's why when Malcolm gets knighted one day, I hope that the line doesn't just say for services to education, it also adds and services to the taxpayer.
And I've stopped. There's another question in the second row, and then there's the lady at the back, and I'm probably about to run out of time.
Hi, Jeff Holden from City and Guilds. I mean, one area of particular concern is that of information advice and guidance, and that's two critical stages really, which is when young people are making possibly A-level or other post-16 qualification choices, and then also down the line when they are starting to think possibly higher education, further education, an apprenticeship or something like that. They're going to have this vast quantity of data, key information set, but who's going to help them through it? Because at the moment there is a void in the area. We're promised new all-age career service, but how much of that will be real, face-to-face, proper advice, and how much online is going to be really important?
Who wants to jump in on that first?
Martin Harris quite rightly stresses the time for advice is early. Sort of choice of A-levels, which is often made well before GCSE, enormously important. Enormously important. And the distortions that Liz has talked about, I mean, completely agree, you know, one should be very focused on that. It's not just information, it's aspirations, it's demystification, it's very wide-ranging, it needs a lot of resources. I don't think that there is a huge amount that universities can do directly to wider participation, but outreach, student mentoring, things like that is an enormously important part of it. I think expert assistance can be quite helpful. I mean, I would like to see, I mean, I'm told that people are working on this, where you're just asked one simple question, and depending on the answer to that, you know, you get asked another question, and you can be taken through it. But ultimately, there is no substitute for face-to-face with somebody who knows the sector. I mean, I always say to people that the first thing they need to ask themselves is, do they want a city university or a campus university? You know, that comes before what subject, because that, you know, it's something enormously important, very important.
Can I mention something the universities have done in London recently? And that is looking at access agreements and looking at the demise of aim higher. The organising body for the London universities, called London Higher, has taken on board AIMI. It's called now Access HE, and it will be rebirthed for 2012. It has a continuity, it's already started. And this is the universities coming together. I think so far 33 of them have signed up to say higher ed has such an interest in this that it should become the host and perpetuate particularly those information advice and guidance functions that AIMI had. Otherwise it gets lost, or it all becomes competitive advantage. Well, actually we all have an advantage. Whether you're an LSE or a London Met, we all have an advantage, as well as the public, in having wider participation. And I think that's a great act done. It was done a little under the duress of the Access Agreement, with the encouragement to collaboration between institutions. If we can do that, universities become closer to AIMI, and not just with schools, but to further education, which has often been left out in this equation. And it's now time, as AIMI was doing good work there, to make sure that gets completely mainstream.
I just come into that point. First of all, I think that whilst you still have a system that missells certain subjects and pretends that some subjects are equal to each other's treatment equivalents, it's very difficult to advise against something that is written down in black and white. So it's misguided to say we should provide information, advice and guidance on a system that is flawed fundamentally. So I think we have to make the incentives work much more in line with the jobs market and the universities market than they do at the moment. And I've said to other university vice-chancellors, they have to be a lot more public in saying which students, which courses are acceptable and which ones are unacceptable. And the Russell Group has its preferred courses. I think it says facilitating. It's all very euphemistic. What they mean is these are the subjects that we want people to study, but they don't actually say that. And
LSE.
Good on the LSE, and I put this to the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge at dinner last week. I said, why don't you do what the LSE does and say which subjects you don't? You don't want people to do, because the LSE did that. And he said, well, it's about our research funding. So I think that's...
Well, also because we've never had our research funding dropped for the fact that we publicly say we don't like
I think there is reluctance from the university sector in taking on these issues, because they're worried about issues like research funding. And the second point I made about schools, it's about teachers. Who has the most contact with students? It's teachers, and they have the contact all the way through. They're the people responsible, where the parental background is not necessarily as aspirational as it ought to be. They're the ones who are responsible for bringing up aspirations. And I'm afraid too often I see in schools that the teachers write off pupils that they shouldn't be writing off. I myself went to a comprehensive school in Leeds. I'm from an academic family, but I saw lots of teachers there who hadn't been to university, top universities themselves, talked about literally words like they're snobby, they're toppish, etc., etc. And that still goes on all the time, which is why I want schools to be published how many students from their school are applying for Oxford and Cambridge, so we can identify which schools are giving encouragement and which ones aren't. Because I think quite often we think about careers too early in this country. People shouldn't be deciding their careers at 14. Those days are long gone, and it is about those wider aspirations.
I mean, 90% of my first year tutees come to LSE with a very clear idea of the job they want, and 90% of them change their mind. And I always tell them their objective is to keep as many doors as open as possible, and disciplinary training for those who are, that way inclined is the best way of doing that. Yes, completely.
I've time for one last question.
Hello, Fatima Kitbury from Pearson. We've had a sort of an interesting debate about how the operation of the loans, and obviously how institutions will respond, and perhaps how they'll be tiered and graded. And I wonder whether we can sort of have a further discussion about the university title. There's reference obviously in the white paper to university colleges, FHE and universities. And I wonder whether the panel has a view on degree awarding powers and opening up degree awarding powers. But equally, really, and I'm trying to squeeze in another question here, really, in terms of how it will affect how the whole sort of opening up of the market, whether you think that will lead to an increase in demand, or whether however much BIS and others try to promote the changes, whether in fact we see a slight dip in demand over the next few years.
Professor, GABs and competition in the sector, I'm going to pick on Malcolm to go first.
I must say, using the word university, I'm completely agnostic. I think it's like the use of the term professor, used in different ways in different countries. It doesn't make any difference. America has lots more professors, has lots more universities. It doesn't mean it's got a poor higher education system. So I think it's just a matter of what you call it. What matters more is who can actually give a degree in which the state would recognise or other bodies would recognise. And I think this is the moment when we do need to open up. And this is a time when clearly the government does have an intention to say there are people other than the standard universities who can give degrees. And that's been going on for a number of years. Clearly, the push for it's going on a bit more. You said the last thing about the opening up of the market. We haven't touched on it much. And as someone who originally came to Britain as an international student, I'm observing very closely the behaviour of our international students and where international students fit within this. Keep in mind, in this city, nearly 500,000 post-secondary students, 100,000 of them are international. I'm seeing a convergence of international and domestic. The idea of the nation-state funding its citizens and the rest not being funded has of course gone. Now you've got the nation-state not funding most of its citizens, but you've got a loan system, and who cares from an institutional viewpoint whether it's the British government, the French government or the Japanese government who's funding their loan. So I think we have a convergence coming in. I'm seeing it in prices already. And one of the biggest ones is going to be in the postgraduate area, where not only are the relativities between undergraduate and postgraduate becoming very tense, but also the relativities between domestic, European and international is becoming similarly part of something that's just starting to move towards something a little bit more like real cost.
University titles. A journalist once asked Ringo, what do you call that haircut? Ringo looked back and said, half. Which makes the point that you can call anything anything you like, and I think you should call things that which makes most people happy. So, like Malcolm, I have no strong feelings about that whatever. Opening the market. Well, we know that technological advance is driving up the demand for skills. It's no accident that participation rates are rising in all countries. In South Korea, 76% of 19-year-olds are in tertiary education. So demand is rising and we are fixing supply. Yes. How crazy can you get?
Can I be slightly, I'm not necessarily saying that Pearson shouldn't be allowed to call itself a university, but we don't actually want Method School to call itself a university. Because what Method School can do is offer a university course that someone else has devised. And that is different. And actually, in many ways for entrance, that's useful to be able to offer a University of London degree or whatever it is. But what I would like to see is also a halfway house, so that if you're offering an economics degree, for example, the core courses, micro, macro, metrics, etc., the sort of first year course plus the sort of core tier in second and third year could be validated by someone like the Royal Economic Society or a university with a decent reputation, but then you could offer specialist options. So at Royal Holloway College, for example, they have a course in the economics of conflict. It's a superb course. I don't want to rule out someone, and obviously Royal Holloway is a proper university, but I wouldn't want somebody... I don't want a new university. I don't want to prevent a new university offering an innovative economics course just because the Royal Economic Society doesn't have a syllabus for it, but it should have its core externally validated, and it should even maybe have to mark its optional papers on the same curve as the performance of its core. And if lots of different universities are all offering Royal Economic Society courses, they can mark each other's scripts in the manner of A-levels, which really would give us a degree of quality control that frankly we don't have now.
Well, thank you for the last word. I think it is about labelling. It's about clear labelling, and that's my issue with the A-levels when we say things are equivalent and they're not. We all know that different universities are good for different things, that some offer more academic courses, others offer professional courses. That's fine, provided people who go to those courses know what they're being offered, that the right bodies are certifying them. So if we've got leading academic bodies like Cambridge University certifying qualifications, that's fine. If it's leading employers, if it's Microsoft certifying something, that's fine, provided people know what that delivers. I think that's important.
Very good. Well, I'm struck It's been a great debate from my point of view. I took amazing amounts of notes. I was struck by how we have started with the question about the future of university places and actually found out that the real question was something completely different, encompassing all sorts of other issues from careers to the future of sixth form colleges. We've discovered that we need to have Liz as ABAC. We've discovered we all need to read Tim's pamphlet, that Malcolm should be knighted to his service to taxpayers, and that clearly Nick should really be king for a day. That's the answer to all of that. So you've asked great questions, and it only really remains to thank our brilliant panel. Thank you.